Throughout the centuries there have been many executions which took place that did not go as well as they could have. For example, in Edinburgh, a young woman named Maggie Dixon was brought into the Scottish capital for her date with the hangman. She had been accused of murdering her child. However, when the executioner placed a noose around her neck, it was very loose, and despite appearing to be dead, Maggie Dixon then woke up a while later inside of her coffin. She was known as Half Hang It Maggie for the rest of her life, and the authorities believed she had lived through her death sentence, and that this had been carried out, and she did not need another date with the executioner. Some believe that God had saved her that day, but there was another man in England who survived 3 attempts to hang him for murder. But what is the story of this? Join us today as we look at the botched execution of the man they could not hang. And remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. John Babbacombe Lee was born in August 1864 in Devon in England, and after leaving school he was employed as a servant by Emma Keyes, who lived at the Glen in Babbacombe, a peaceful seaside village. He then after this went to enlist in the Navy, but was injured, and then was released from service 3 years later. Following this he then went to work for Colonel Brownlow, who lived at Ridge Hill in Torquay, but in 1883 he was convicted of stealing silverware worth £20 from his master, and for this he was sentenced to 6 months' hard labour at Exeter Prison, after he pled guilty of the crime. When he was released, Miss Keyes, who liked John when he worked for her, gave him a second chance, and she employed him again. But then on the 15th of November 1884, shortly after John's release from prison, there was a fire at the house, and Emma Keyes was found dead with her throat slashed. The fire had been started by the murderer in an attempt to burn her body and destroy the evidence. John Lee was 20 years old and was the only man in the house at the time when he was arrested for the murder. He held a grudge against Emma when she docked his wages and reduced his pay, and he did have a cut on his arm when he broke the window of the dining room to let the smoke out. But he was sent to inquest as he could not give a good enough alibi. An inquest before jury was held and 25 witness statements were read, and the jury then declared that Lee was responsible for Emma's murder and death. The coroner said that willful murder by John Lee should be listed on her death certificate. However, it was presumed that John was guilty. Because of this, he was tried in Exeter Guildhall on the 2nd of February 1885 for murder. The case was a sham, and it suggested that Lee's coat smelled of paraffin, which was used to ignite the fire. However, there was suggestion that the evidence had been tampered with. The evidence against him was circumstantial, but the jury took 40 minutes to find John Lee guilty, and he was sentenced to death. He said in response to being condemned, "The reason I am so calm is that I trust the Lord, and he knows I am innocent." Executions in Exeter before 1868 were huge public occasions, where thousands would watch on to see the proceedings, and as many as 20,000 people would flock to watch the killing. The method of execution was known as a long drop, and height and weight was used to calculate the drop needed to break the neck. John Lee was to be executed on the 23rd of February 1885, and he wrote a letter to his half-sister 12 days before that said, "There is no doubt that the truth will come out after I am dead. It must be some very hard-hearted persons to let me die for nothing. They have not told 6 words of truth. That is the servants, and that lovely stepsister, who carries her character with her." The night before the execution, Lee said he saw an angel that told him not to worry, as he would not be executed as he was innocent. The scaffold used to take his life was situated in an old prison hospital building to begin with, but it was then recently moved to the Van House. John Lee's execution would be the first to take place in the new location, and the drop had already been tested by the executioner. It was said, on the morning of Saturday the 21st of February, the apparatus was by my order thoroughly overhauled, cleaned and tested by the engineer officer and a warder carpenter. On the afternoon of the same day the apparatus was again tested by the artisan warder, and the executioner the latter, after trying it twice over, reporting to me verbally that he was satisfied for its present use. But John Babbacombe Lee would not die that day. The remarkable and crazy events of his execution were described by a witness, the Chief Constable of Devon. He wrote, "On the prisoner reaching the place of execution, he was placed by the executioner immediately under the crossbeam, over which carried the rope. He was faced outwards towards a door, with both feet standing transversely on the junction of the 2 flaps or shutters which formed the drop. The executioner, with considerable skill and rapidity, as it appears to me, strapped the culprit's legs above the ankles, drew the cap over his face, adjusted the noose round his neck, stepped back and pulled the iron handle or the trigger to let fall the footboards, to my intense astonishment. However, these latter deflected only about 1/4 of an inch and appeared to be tightly jammed together about the centre. The executioner and some of the prison officials standing by endeavoured, by stamping on the boards, to get them to move, but without avail. After some seconds the prisoner's face was uncovered, and he was led away to an adjoining cell or room in the prison. In the meantime the executioner and the prison officials did their best to ascertain the cause of the machine not working. My own impression was that the morning before was very damp and wet, the footboards had become swollen, and were thus unable to free themselves with the top edges when they came into contact. I consequently urged the use of the plane, and pointed out the spot which I considered caused the impediment. The prison engineer procured a plane and a tomahawk, and we eased the centre of the boards. A prison warder was made to stand on them, holding on by both hands to the rope. The trigger was pulled and the boards fell. The prisoner was then brought out again, and the execution proceeded as in the first instance, but again the boards refused to fall. He then went on to say that this third attempt having failed, I ordered him to be removed to a cell near myself, attempting to take him into my reception ward, through which he had previously passed. That I have reported to have said to the prison officials, "You may experiment as much as you like on the sack of flour, but you shall not experiment on this man any longer." That he was taken accordingly into a passage near, that presently the governor informed the chaplain and myself that the apparatus would not work, that then I desired that this man should be taken back and the execution postponed. That the said condemned prisoner was returned to his cell, that I offered the under-sheriff a certificate, which he was gladly to accept. That such certificate was drawn up in my office and signed by the governor, chaplain and myself, for the information of Her Majesty's Secretary of State. So John Lee had been hanged 3 times and had not died. There had been a fault on the scaffold and on the gallows, and it was said that they discovered that the end of the long hinges was resting on 1/8 of an inch on the draw bolt at the crank. Then they tried to work the lever without any weight on the platform, and found that when the lever was drawn quickly, the platform fell. If drawn slowly, one trial it remained fast, and another trial it fell, but seemed to bind or grate at the end of the long hinge. They were then perfectly satisfied that the cause of the failure to act was due to the fact that one of the long hinges rested on the draw bolt 1/8 of an inch too much. It is probable that the refixing of the scaffold, the 2 sides were placed 1/8 of an inch nearer than they had been before, so that the long hinge had been very slightly bent in some way at that time. But the Home Secretary heard of what had happened with Lee's execution, and he commuted the death sentence to life imprisonment. John Lee was released from prison in 1907, after he served 22 years in prison, and he became known as a man they could not hang. He became a minor celebrity, and he married in January 1909 and had 2 children. But then he would abandon his wife for another woman, and he travelled with this woman to America in 1911, and he settled there and lived to the age of 80, dying on the 19th of March 1945. But he was known as a man who survived shockingly 3 executions, and despite the fact there was some fault in the scaffold and the device of death, he would live to see another day. Some people at the time would have believed that he was saved by God, but interestingly the man they could not hang lived a life which was decades longer than it should have been. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.